morning. This is Stan in Gainesville, Florida, coming off that high from the Ken Billington interview, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Hi, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas, and today we are discussing Lekos, focus calls, consoles, and we're going back to high school on Light Talk.
Going back to high school. 2 weeks in a row we're going back to high school.
I got left back twice? Oh, jeez.
I'm not sure I want to go back to high school, but this is Ann, and I'm in San Clemente, California.
You know, we should just talk about our high schools, but
Oh, no.
Or junior high school, as the case may be.
or middle school, but that's enough. Hey,
Right.
This is David in Long Beach, California, and if you don't already know by our blabbering, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Sistahs. Yeah, there we go. So anyway, welcome to episode 121, and Stan mentioned it at the top, but we are sort of in our Ken Billington Afterglow. And I must say, again, this is just my opinion, and I don't know if my brothers and sister actually agree with it, but that may have been the best show we've ever done.
This was a good show. Yeah, it was a top. It's in the Legends of Lumen Legends category.
Well, it was a legend show, right? Because it was legendary light, but it was a great interview. We've gotten great feedback. We've gotten a ton of downloads. A lot of people are listening to it, and a lot of people are telling us that it was great. So I guess it was pretty good.
Well, he had fun, right? I mean, that's the thing, right?
Yeah,
he had a good time.
He had a great time. He had a terrific time, and but he always seems to have a good time in the theater.
That's
at
true.
least in
That's
my
what makes him
experience.
Ken Billington.
Well, there you go. Anyway, we're so happy to have Ann on the show because she originally wanted to be on that interview show, but we couldn't work out the schedule. I think, Ann, were you working or you were at school or something was going on?
Such a bummer. I really wanted to be there.
Yeah, because Ann, as we all know, is very close with Ken. She worked with him for a year or so, or maybe more.
Yeah, 2 years, over 2 years. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and he even mentioned Ann in the interview. It was lovely. He was like giving you props for your book.
Oh my gosh. I about fell on the floor when he said that. It's like, he does so many things I can't believe he remembered.
One of the things we wanted to give Ann the opportunity to do, since she wasn't able to be on the show, was to just give us a few words, a summary of how she felt about the interview. So what do you think, Ann?
Wow, it was just, it's just always amazing to hear him talk. Like, first of all, my career would not exist without Ken Billington. He and Ben Piercy took pity on a girl out of grad school at one point. And I got the job in his office, 3 days before I graduated grad school and felt like the luckiest person on the universe. And, was doing things like watering plants and answering phones and ordering office supplies. It was like anything to be close to the king, right? And he was so good to me, and he'd let me, bring his mail to the theater. So I'd hang out as sort of an intern, which you're not supposed to do on Broadway. And, I didn't do any paperwork, so there's nothing wrong going on. But like just observing his work, and get him coffee whenever he doesn't really drink coffee, but whatever he needed to drink or eat at that time. And it was just, as a budding lighting designer right out of school, the most amazing, incredible position I could ever be in. So, I just, and he did mention my book, which like I said, I just felt like my knees went weak that he remembers that I even wrote that. Like, he's just so busy. And he wrote my foreword for that book, which is, right. A blessing. And I just can never believe how lucky I am that he even gives me the time of day, because he's just so busy, not because he's, he's the sweetest guy ever. But I don't know. He said that about my book with, it might influence more people than he would, which is funny, like I said, because, really, like, he mentioned the family tree, the Billington family tree.
Yeah.
I had my students do that exercise at one point. And we did it with all, a bunch of Broadway people, but Billington was a huge component of that family tree. And it was quite incredible where all of it was trickling down. And my book is really his work. Like, it's my work is so influenced by his work that I make no, I'm not shy to say that a lot of the work in there is what I learned at Billington's. And how, because I learned it at Billington's, that means many, many other people on Broadway are doing it that way as well. And so it's become sort of the gold standard of how you do Broadway paperwork. And so I'm pretty much just the one that wrote it down,
Right. Thank God.
It's kind of like, the Greeks, and when the ancient Greeks started writing down theater, it was like, well, they'd been doing it forever, but like somebody just at one point, Aristotle, I think, sat down and wrote it down, and that's kind of how I feel about his influence on my work and on that book particularly. So, yeah, I just thought that was really special, and God, what an incredible interview. Like, Stan and I were talking offline, and he said, he'd heard things in that interview that he'd never heard Ken say before. And I feel the same way. Like, I'd never heard the gingerbread man story, which was amazing.
The 60
right?
amp knife switch.
Yes.
A blackout. That's where you got that idea for Sweeney Todd.
Right?
We're going to do a blackout right after the organ. That 60 amp knife switch comes down. Boom.
Yeah. Memories from gingerbread time. Yeah.
Anne, I wanted to say something you were talking about with your book, and you just wrote it down, and, like the people of the book. But he also said something about the generosity of designers and the sharing, and how he got this thing to do this version of Chorus Line after Natasha had revived it, and he just called her up and she said, well, I'll just send you everything I have. And I think that's something really beautiful about the nature of our business. We're all, at least most of us anyway, I can't speak for everyone, is really generous with their knowledge. That's sort of what this show is about too. And so I don't know if that's true in other industries, but and I think it's probably because of people like Ken and the influence that they have, that radiates out, it's the culture that he helped create in a larger sense. It's really quite wonderful.
I don't think a brain surgeon would take a 19-year-old guy or gal who's known nothing about brain surgery and drag them into the operating room. Right? I don't think you'll be seeing that. But that's a very good point, Stan. And it is generosity. He talked about the generosity of Tharon. When Tharon basically, said, yeah, you may not know how to be an assistant, but you're going to learn right now. Same thing with Gilbert and me. I mean, it's like, we're going to teach you how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it influences me even to this day. I recently got connected to a young man in Bangkok who wants to come study with me, and he's an actor, musical theater guy who now wants to be a lighting designer. And I sent him all this stuff, links to Anne's book, all this information. And I thought, if you're really into it, I'll be hearing from you within 3 days. If you're not, you're just fooling me. And the guy is like sitting in front of Vectorworks now sending me pictures of his work. And okay, so he's really motivated.
Awesome.
But I'm taking my time. He may not be at my program, but that ethic is I feel like that's sort of what Ken has given a lot of us in terms of the way that we respond to the world.
So, Steve, what was your favorite part of the interview?
Well, I'm a big fan of the gingerbread story myself. I think it's interesting that if you kind of look at that, his theater teacher's decision to kind of scold him, put him in a trajectory that he might not have gone on.
Interesting.
She told him to go sit down.
Yeah.
If you can't behave yourself, go sit down in the wings. So,
but he found this niche.
It's very interesting. He also talked about generosity, about that boy that he met who wanted to get into the theater, and he told him that he should be an usher. And then about 20, 30 years later, he's on the phone saying that he's now the general director of this theater company and thanking him. That's just a beautiful thing. And then the final thing I just wanted to mention was the thing he said about, no matter what the show is, you still do your best work. Even though you know the show is going to be a failure, or it's not going to make it to Broadway, or it may not have a lot of money, you still do your best work because you're there. And you always have that standard. You always keep your standard of quality and professionalism there. That was very, very good and very important.
Absolutely. I totally believe in that. I pass that on to my students. I'm like, it doesn't matter if you're making $0 or $50 or $50,000. Like, you draft the same way. You do the same quality of design. You are still nice to who's ever in charge. Like, all that stuff. It doesn't matter what you're getting paid. That's your work and your calling card.
That's what gets remembered.
Yeah, and I think, some of that might be passed down from the grandmothers of our industry, too. Like, if he's learning from Tharon, like, it was a time when, as a woman, you couldn't go in there and throw a fit because no way would you get your foot in the door, and so they learned to kill it through kindness. And I think that just was passed down through all the generations, and thank goodness, because that makes it such a wonderful industry.
Agreed.
So anyway, if you haven't listened to the interview, it's episode 120. It was just done last. Well, actually, the interview was way back in March, I believe, when we did it.
It took. He agreed to it like 2 years ago when he was going to be our first anniversary guest, and he couldn't make it because of scheduling. That's when we had Don Holder. So we've been talking to him for as long as Light Talk has been on the air about the interview.
Right,
It just
but
took
the
that
interview
long.
was taped back in March. And because I was in, where was I? I was someplace in Florida.
South Carolina.
Yeah, South Carolina, Myrtle Beach. What the hell was I doing in Myrtle Beach? But anyway, that's where I
Family
was.
thing. You were doing a
oh, that's
family
right.
thing.
I went. It was the cousins thing. Right. It was great. But yeah, so the dates may be off, but we had to wait for a couple of months. So anyway, if you haven't heard it, go listen to it. It's fantastic, and you'll
Worth the wait. It was
worth the wait. Absolutely.
I just want to thank the three of you for getting him on the show. You know, just anything we can like record of his wisdom and pass on
Absolutely.
is incredible. So thank you for doing that for everybody.
It's our pleasure. I mean, he was like, it was so funny when we were talking about doing the show. We were talking about, hey, we'll bring some people on, you know, and I know some people. We all know people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the first guest we had was Josh White. I had just interviewed Josh for something else a few months earlier, and I knew he'd be a great interview because you never know, you know, when you interview somebody, if you don't know them personally or you haven't heard an interview that they've done, it's a gamble. I mean, some people could be terrible interviews, and I knew that Josh was going to be an automatic, and he was. And I also knew that Ken would be, but we were trying to get Ken on for that first anniversary show. He was just so busy. I mean, we were trying to figure out times and all that, and we just couldn't do it. And so we delayed it a year, and now that's where we are now. So yeah, and I must say that we've been very lucky with our interviews because they're all great. You know, all these people are terrific. So thank God.
I think we're booked up, Steve. Right? Aren't we booked till the end of 19 with interviews?
Yeah, we're starting to recruit people now for season 4.
Wow, season 4. Wow. All right.
Season 4. I just can't believe I heard those words.
Oh my God. All right, so let's get started with the show today. That was great, Ann. And thank you for being on the show today and giving us your amazing reactions to that, because we know how close you are to Ken and to his office and to his work. So I'm so happy that you had a chance to be involved.
Yeah, me too. You know, it's one of those things. I tell my students they cannot graduate if they don't know who Ken Billington is.
Oh my God.
At the very least.
And Tharon, actually.
Yeah, forget it. They can't even step into the classroom. They don't learn. Okay, so hey, amazingly, Ann has our first question today.
I sure do, and it's from California. Look at that.
Hey.
Hey. So Tracy in beautiful California, wherever she is, says, I am in college and about to focus my first black box show of 37 lights. Congratulations, Tracy. Very cool. Can you suggest a focusing strategy? All right. Well, Tracy, let's see. For me, it's no different focusing a black box than it is a proscenium or an arena or anything else. And the key is, well, I guess one thing I don't know is whether you designed the light plot or not. Because if you designed the light plot, then you probably know where each of those lights should focus. If you didn't design the light plot, then that's a little trickier. So let's start with if you designed the lights. So if you designed the light plot, when you placed each light, you probably knew, you know, you might have broken the areas into what we call lighting areas, you know, A through what would we have? 6 or 9 areas in a black box, typically, something like that, depending on how big it is. So then what I do is I bring what I call focus tapes, which is, you could use a tape measure. You just lay out a tape measure, you know, at the center line and at the very downstage edge of a black box, usually, because there isn't a proscenium. And then whatever you did on your light plot, where you laid out your lighting areas, that's where you would stand to focus the light. So there is a chance here, I'm thinking, because it's your first black box show and it's 37 lights, that maybe you did not do the light plot. And so if that's the case, and my brothers, I'm sure, have other things to say about this, but if that's the case, I'd try to figure out what the intention of that light plot was in the first place. Like, there's probably different systems of light. And when we say systems of light, we're talking about they have the same angle, they have the same purpose, and typically the same color. So perhaps there's, you know, if there's maybe 6 36s all pointed at the stage that are all no color or R33 or something like that, those might be your front lights. And so you know you need to divide the space up into 6 areas or whatever that is. Areas are usually 8 to 12 feet in diameter. So I think about 10 feet diameter circles, and they overlap a little bit. But you would stand at each one of those and try to even out the focus. And then basically just cover the space as much as you can with a little bit of overlap in the lights. And then cut off, I don't know how to say it better than like cut off things that are ugly or distracting. So if you have like, a really ugly, I don't know, wall on one side.
It's a thrust. It could be an ugly audience member.
It could be.
Or a good-looking one.
Yeah, and that goes in the category of distracting, right? You want to cut off of the audience. We're not blinding them. So maybe you cut it to their laps is usually what I do. So it's not any different for me than another space, but there are things to think about, like keeping off of the audience so you're not blinding their eyes. And there are some different like designing techniques, but that's a whole other different topic. But I have talked enough. Let's see what my brothers think. How about David? What do you think?
What do I think about black box?
Yeah.
I don't think it matters whether you're doing a black box or if you're doing a proscenium. Focusing strategy will depend on the show, because there may be shows that you'll do in this black box that will only require like 4 or 5 lights. You say 37. A lot of people say, "Oh my God, how can someone, design with only 37 lights?" Well, actually, in a black box, especially in a black box, if it's a smaller black box, that's a very intimate space. And you can get away with a lot more in a small black box than you can in a proscenium stage where the closest audience member is 20 feet away. So I just think that a black box actually offers you a lot more flexibility. So if you do all the areas and all that, yeah, that's great. Those is what we call gamoots, get me out of trouble lights, or fill light. But I would start with just your key lights for each scene. Just focus your key lights, and whatever you have left, then do washes to fill in the light. But, just, again, break everything down to scenes, to moments. What is the key light? Like Ken said last week, and I said before, what's the most important light? That's your key light. And what do you do with that key light? You take it to full.
And then see what else you need.
That's
Or
right.
do you need that
may
much?
not need anything else. I mean, that light may bounce and create fill light. You know what I'm talking about? And again, it's not going to look like, and this is the big mistake that I've heard a lot of people say, like, well, I want it to look the same from every direction. It's not.
That's absurd.
And if you do
That's
that,
absurd.
you can actually do that, but it's going to look like crap.
It's like science lighting. That's like
you might as well get some fluorescence out.
Uniformity. I have one thought I would just throw in there. You guys sort of hit on it. What's the arrangement of like David says, the show? We have a large black box where I work. It's like 60 by 60, but every scenic designer seems to want a different seating arrangement. So I think if you're in the round, it's one approach. If you're in a proscenium or an end stage, that's another approach. If you're in a 3/4, like David said, a thrust. So in terms of what Ann is talking about, it matters what the scenic designer gave you and what the arrangement is in terms of strategy, I think.
Well, I'm going to go back again to the question here, and it says my first black box show. So I'm going to assume you've designed it. I think when you're focusing your first show, it's nice if you're organized. If you come into the space and you've spoken with the people who are going to focus your show about what you're trying to accomplish, and if you're a little nervous, which I would be, do something easy. Focus the special on the chair. Focus the special on the refrigerator. Do something that you're going to succeed at right off the bat. Because sometimes it's difficult to get an even wash on the stage. Sometimes you got to focus it 3 and 4 times. So start with the stuff that's really easy, kind of get warmed up, get a relaxed atmosphere going with your crew, and just work through it slowly and efficiently. And if you see something you don't like, go ahead and change it right then. If the light needs to move a couple feet to the left to focus on that chair, go ahead and move it right now. If that blue is a little too dark, go ahead and put a lighter shade of blue in. So I would say take your time and just enjoy your very first show.
Yeah. And Steve, I'm so glad you mentioned nervous, because Tracy, if you're nervous, that's very common, and I don't know about my brothers here, but I am absolutely nervous at every focus.
Sure.
Still,
I'm excited.
Day.
I'm like, is that going to work?
Yeah,
is it work?
That's when you know if you did the light plot, quote unquote, right or not, and you see if it's going to work or not. And so I'm always, not sleeping the night before a focus. So if you're a little nervous, don't even worry about it. It's just part of the process.
Well, and you're also talking about when you go to focus, is this the show that everyone's going to figure out you don't know what you're talking about. Is this the show they're going to catch
You're
you?
going to be exposed. Yes.
Yes.
Luckily, they never
Exposed
do.
as a fraud.
We're all hacks. That's what we are.
We're all imposters.
Imposter syndrome.
Isn't that true about all artists? They think they always say, even the great artists will say, I always kind of felt like I was faking it. If you watch those recent interviews with Paul McCartney, where he says, I'm still not sure I'm good enough. Like you're Sir Paul McCartney, and he's still thinking he's not good enough.
All right. Diane from New Smyrna Beach, Florida asks, how do you go about teaching your students a console?
Well, I would say start with, here's the console. This is how I plug it in. This is how I plug in DMX. And then show them how to patch. Start right there, something simple. And I have a light patched in, and now I'm going to show you how to turn that light on. And then I'm going to show you how to write a cue. So I think little baby bites. You start out with the most simple stuff and their owner manuals, their manufacturers, their videos. But just start with, oh, by the way, there are 2 on switches on the board. And go there. I mean, Ann, you're engaged in teaching students all the time. What do you guys do in California?
Yeah, I think the trick is knowing the level of your student and not teaching too much at first. So, I have undergrads in my Lighting 1 class, and I start them off with a project about, almost towards the end of the semester called the Musicals Project, and I give them a piece from a musical to design. And then I take them to the board and I say, we have a rep plot in our little light lab with an ETC element in there. And I say, okay, here's how you use the board. And I give them a cheat sheet that has maybe 7 or 8 basic things on it. And it's like 1 at full, enter. 1 + 2 at full, enter. So it's literally, stepping through the very, very basics. And here's how you save. And if you really want, you could turn on the moving lights, but you got to kind of teach yourself that, so I don't overwhelm them at first. And I think that's the key. And I put them in groups so that kind of like what you said about different levels together. I put them in groups so they kind of learn off each other and they don't panic by themselves in the dark light lab. And then more advanced students, like in Lighting 2, we've got grad students and high-level undergrads. I give them a cueing project that's also a musical, because that's me, but I do it through Vision. So in those classes, we're learning Vectorworks Vision, which is a visualizer program. And so I have them build the light lab in Vision, and then I have them cue in Vision using the Nomad console, in their laptop or whatever it is. And then we cue it completely in Vision, and then we take it to the light lab, and they try it out in there too. So it's like the next step. Like I say like, well, now you must do a moving light fly out. Now you must do whatever, so we talk through all those different things. And I do have them watch all of the different ETC console videos that are out there in those classes. And then finally, I bring ETC in. They come to my school every year, and every 3rd year we do an advanced programming 2-day seminar. And so ETC walks them through a whole bunch of things, and it's people of all different levels, and then they do a project based on that. So you got to kind of, like Steve said, sort of mini bites. You got to think about the level of your audience and how you're going to feed it to them.
One thing I want to say is that if you want to do this by yourself, if you don't belong to a school, a lot of these companies will come to a larger city and do a group class. And I think it's really important. This is something that came up last week when CAST was talking about their training for Black Tracks. And I did a little research, and they were announcing a training session, and they were charging $1,500 for that training session, which I think is a little outrageous, especially for students. I think students, they can't afford $1,500. Now, I looked at some of the other companies. I actually posted this on the Facebook page, is that they're reasonable, $300, $500, $400, for a 2-day session. That is reasonable. So I think the companies that they really need to look at themselves, and the smart ones are doing this. They're saying these are our future customers. Hey, listen, this is why Verilight did it from the very beginning. When I was at SMU, they were smart. They knew that if they got students trained on the Artisan, they would be speccing out Verilights. Mm-hmm. It's that simple, and it's true. That's what I did. I went through the artisan training, believe it or not. Took barrel lights apart to the screws and put them back together.
You ran a console? Wait a minute.
Yes, I ran a console. But let me tell you something. The artisan was a pretty simple console to run, let me tell you. But the point being is that smart companies will make it easy for students to learn the technology.
I'm so glad you said that, because ETC comes down to my place for free, but I've had other companies not do that, and I'm like, you don't understand, like, these are your future customers, you know, and I'm always disappointed when that doesn't work out. So like, it's such an easy marketing strategy, like, do it.
It's so easy.
And it's good for us,
so
it's good for them. Like,
So the other thing, this person who maybe is a student could do is take a look at LDI.
Yep.
And go out there for some console training. Go to a convention every other year.
Yep.
Take advantage of the classes. Some are paid, some are free.
Right.
But take a look at that.
Absolutely. Great suggestions.
Good point.
All right. And Stan, you have our next question.
And this comes from the heartland. Mark in Iowa writes, can you discuss the real, and then he puts in parentheses, if any, end parentheses, benefits of LED technology? And then he says, please don't give me the ETC Strand Salesmen Talking Points. Oh, what a question. Finally, he says, what ERSs do you recommend? Well, okay, I'll get this going, and then this is going to be a free-for-all, I think. It's hard to kind of steer away from salesman talking points because there are advantages and disadvantages, but I'll try and be as objectively neutral as I can. So an LED ellipsoid offers you a lot of flexibility. Right? It's just a lot of things you can do with it, more things than you could do with a traditional fixture. Color, for example, incredibly flexible. And not just picking a color, but fading from one color to another. Whites, there's just a lot of richness and layers in the color capabilities of an LED fixture. The other thing is obvious. I'll just say it for you since you're asking. There's a longevity factor, right? These things are just going to last longer. I'm still using 10-year-old computers. I mean, there's a computer in there. There's LEDs. There's solid-state light sources in there. So there's a longevity factor that's an advantage. And if you're re-equipping a theater, which I do a lot of, it's a smaller inventory, right? You just don't need as many fixtures. On the downside is because it's a computer, essentially each fixture, they really will prefer a clean environment. So if you've got a very dirty work environment, computers don't like that. Electronics don't like dust because it creates a thermal blanket on top of PCBs. So depending upon the kind of environment you're in, that's a downside. You want to have a clean theater. There's a high upfront cost, no question. The cost of an LED fixture versus a tungsten fixture, you're just going to pay more. But you can rationalize, if you have the bank, you're offsetting the expenditure down the road because of longevity and less consumption. They do have a more complex user interface. You just have to get used to all the bells and whistles and modes and things that fixture can do and how to patch it and all of that stuff. So it's a more complex piece of technology. And the other downside is weight. So they're definitely heavier. So depending upon where you put it and how you're going to rig it and who's lifting it and how often you're lifting it, or if you have the capability to hold the stuff in the air, they are definitely a heavier item. So those are my goods and bads about it. In terms of fixtures, I have most direct experience with the Luster line. I have direct experience with the Strand silicon line, and I have direct experience with the Chevet line, all of which I think are fine products. There's a whole lot of other stuff out there as well. I am very taken with the Martin product, and we are specifying those on a project right now in Tampa. Although I have heard of some others that I haven't had my hands on that I hear really great things about.
Yeah, the ProLights Eclipse. Driscoll has raved about this light. I have seen it. I've never seen it on, so I can't tell you about it. But from what I've heard, it's a lot less expensive than a lot of the competition.
Just thinking as a designer, the benefit of LED is the color changing for me, you know. The disadvantage is that if you're in white, it's not as bright as a traditional Source 4, for example. But, you know, more saturated colors are brighter. So I'm still sort of working out those photometrics in my head. And as far as favorites, I'm sort of an ETC baby. So, the Luster Plus Series 2 is my favorite. And what I really love about it is the 7-color system. And I think one of the main reasons for that is I did a bunch of research into metamerism a year and a half ago or something when I was writing an article. And it was talking about, the people I was talking about that are real color experts were talking about how it renders skin tone. And the fact that there's that cyan LED in there helps to render skin, which sounds sort of odd until you think about like skin actually has, the blue veins, and some people have sort of blue qualities to their skin. And, there's all these different nuances to human skin that I think the 7 colors really help with. So those are sort of my things. And, speaking just of ETC, the color source is also nice light, but don't try to mix the two in a system. Like, don't think the 7 color and the 4 color are going to be the same, because they mix color in completely different ways.
Well, I'm not afraid, and Anne isn't afraid. I'm going to go for Mark's answer. I'm using the Martin ELP CLs. I think they're fantastic lights, and I also really like the Strand SPX line. And I guarantee you, every manufacturer is going to have something exciting at LDI. They're all, you pick them. They've all got stuff going on back in the warehouse behind locked doors that we don't know about. And there's going to be some wonderful lights from everybody at LDI this fall. So unless you're desperate to buy a light today, I would give it a couple months and see what the new stuff is that's coming out. But again, major manufacturer, you should have no worries with anybody.
You are listening to Light Talk with the Lumen Brothers and Sistah. Light Talk is sponsored by...
As a busy theater professional, your days can be both long and hectic. Opening a new show, a book signing, stopping by the local university to lecture, or as you say, just another Tuesday keeps you on the run. This means you don't always have time for healthy meals. Well, the good men and women at Pet Sweat of Japan have your back with 3 new tasty beverages. Just imagine, it's 6 a.m. and you have overslept. No time for breakfast. You are late, my friend, but what to do? No need to panic. Just open the fridge and pull out pancake in a can. Some genius dipped his fingers in the pancake batter bowl once too many times, and thus pancake in a can sprang forth. Skipping the griddle saves you serious time when thick, gooey batter in a can awaits. All that great flapjack taste without the nutrition. Use a spoon or just pour it on your hand. Oh. Yummy.
Is it wrong if that sounds good?
Let's face it, you can't seem to kick that cigarette habit, but you can't light up on the subway. That would not be PC. What to do, kitten? Just reach into your backpack and pull out a warm can of Tobacco Shock. The shock refers to that lemon-lime flavor infusion. It also describes the reaction your gag reflex will have. Am I drinking rubbing alcohol mixed with a butt from an ashtray? Why, yes, you are. But you don't give a damn because you're hooked. Finally, it's 3 p.m. and the mid-afternoon slump is hitting you hard. You don't have any energy and you can barely keep your eyes open. You need a nap, but no time for that. Mick Jagger's on the phone. Just grab yourself a cold, refreshing can of Pooh honey water. The name says it all. Pooh honey water. Return to your childhood and your beloved Winnie the Pooh. Remember his magical honey pot of delight? Now you have one too. Take a long, deep drink and enjoy the rich taste of artificial honey. Not only that, but the sugar will give you that energy hit you need. Pet Sweat of Japan. Always something good in the kitchen for the busy designer.
Wow.
I'll take an order of 1 and 3. I'm okay with that.
And now, back to Light Talk.
Well, those ducks you hear in the background tell us that once again, it's time for our ever popular Let's Talk About segment. And today we were going to talk a little bit about texture and creating texture. This actually came from a question that was posted on our Light Talk Facebook group about ways of creating texture on stage and gobos, dealing with gobos and things like that. But I don't know. Let's just open this up. We know that Anne loves gobos.
I do.
Right? She's a self-professed gobo addict.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, Tharon used to wear a little medallion of 869, which was a Roscaline color, around her neck because she used it brilliantly all the time.
I didn't know that.
And yes, and a bunch of electricians got together and gave her a good show gift, and it was a little medallion with a piece of 869 in it, and she wore it quite a bit actually. For Anne has gigantic gobo earrings that she wears.
That's true.
Sometimes there are 3 or 4 of them. Depending on her mood, she may have a construction breakup, or she could have like a blob breakup. But anyway,
okay.
So Anne, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you use gobos for texture?
Oh, well, I guess I'm like the pedantic answer, right? Because you're going to tell us all these amazing ways to do it without gobos.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Because I use gobos
He just
too.
uses dimmers.
I just love them. I love like the way that light with texture in it like dances over the human form. Like I love how it makes the form look like it's moving more than it actually is, or jumping higher than it actually is. Like I love how it can make scenery do things that you've never imagined that it would from the initial viewing of it, and usually it's beyond what you, the lighting designer, even expected, right? Like you throw some gobo on and it's like, oh my God, it just looks incredible. I didn't think it would look that good, but thank goodness, and I just think it's a quality of light that we have the fortune of using in lighting design, because there's no other place that it's really used. Like, yes, you'd make maybe a custom gobo for architecture that's like the company logo or something. Like, that's the only thing I've ever done in architecture with a gobo. But in theater, it's a huge part of artistic expression. So for me, a show without gobos is sometimes necessary if it's a show that should be clean. The script calls for a clean show. But I'm always a little sad because I miss that like extra boost of interest that it does on stage, and I do like when I lecture to my grad students, it's like Gobo-Tastic, like so much about gobos. Like
Gobo-Tastic.
they just want to like throw me out the window probably eventually, because it's like, I talk about how much I love like stretchy gobos, for example, versus like down gobos that look like puddles of light, and I love sort of the way you can manipulate them through overlapping the gobos, because then you get various forms of a look on a person, and it could be something like Moonscape, which is blobby, along with like what is it called?
Brush breakup.
Yeah, like brush or like
sharp.
a stripy thing, so I can't think of a good name right
Alpha
now.
rays. Alpha rays.
Yeah.
That's
yes,
stripy.
but that idea, yeah. So you get like 2 feelings of quality on the person. And so I just think one of the things that new young lighting designers do is they go, ooh, gobos are cool. And I remember that day when I was like, oh my God, a gobo's the best thing ever. I've never seen anything like it. But what they don't know is that it's not like you're doing a forest, you have to use the forest gobo. And, it's like, it's not a paint by number kit. It's an artist's studio, where you can use it in so many different ways, and you can combine them on top of each other in the same fixture, and you can use gobo tape if you can still find it to like create different things on the gobo. You can alternate the window that you got, all these different things. So it's a really exciting paintbrush for me. So yeah, I guess I'm the one that can talk about using it like normally, quote unquote, versus I'm excited about all the stuff you shared online, David, and I'm excited to hear more. So,
well, I just want to make it known that I do use gobos. I love gobos. I found that early in my career, I used a lot of gobos, and I think my aesthetic has changed. And a lot of it was from bad directors saying, oh, that big flat piece of scenery right there? Why don't you throw a leaf gobo on it? It'll make it look better. No, it won't.
I do have some gobos I'm allergic to like that.
And what's worse is when you do it, and the director says, oh, it looks fantastic, and it looks like crap. It's like, no, it looks terrible.
Sometimes there are some things you can't fix with light.
I was talking a couple weeks ago about how you create texture on stage, not only through gobos, which I use, obviously, but also just through thinking about the space in a 3-dimensional way, okay? Thinking about how actors move through different types of light. So it could be angle, it could be color changes. It's layering the stage with light. Students usually don't think about that. They think about light sort of in very two-dimensional ways, especially when they're working in proscenium. In thrust, in black box, in or arena, yes, it's a three-dimensional space, really easy to see. But when you're dealing with proscenium, it's not. And let's be honest, 90% of the shows I do are proscenium shows, maybe even 95%. And so we have to create this space, this depth, through layering of lights. So you can actually create a texture of light as these actors go through different layers of light, and you have really no patterns in there whatsoever. That was my point. And you could do it also through dynamic cueing, where and this is something that Tharon used to do, which is she did it in Chorus Line. Matter of fact, for anyone who's ever seen the original lighting design of that, which Ken recreated last year on Broadway, which I thought was another fabulous story, that whole beginning song, which is I Think I Got It, which I think the song is, she uses amazing amount of layering as these dancers move up and down stage. And there's a whole sequence of cues at the end of that song where they go into the circle and they're handing out the resumes. You don't see it, but where the lighting has moved from downstage to mid stage, and then they break out and they all go upstage against the periactoi, right? And all you see are shin kickers. And then as they're coming down, the layers of light just build, right until they hit the line. And then you have this bump cue and all this white light hitting them as they hold the resume pictures up. Amazing. That sequence, which I found absolutely stunningly brilliant and really something I live with to this day. And as a student, when she came to my school, I asked her, how did you come up with this? How did you come up with this series of 6 or 7 cues? Right? And you know what her answer was? I watched the rehearsal. Right? Because she saw the layering. She saw it all there in the rehearsal room. Right? So she thought about lighting in a three-dimensional world and creating those 3 dimensions. And that's what I'm talking about, dude, with creating texture within the 3-dimensional world. That doesn't mean you can't use gobos.
Well, and she had the computer to do it, which gave her that. I think she probably had visions that she couldn't have gotten on manual preset.
Yeah, absolutely.
And David, is that what you were saying? Like you were saying about using intensity as different layers and things?
Absolutely. Again, this is stuff that I learned from watching her shows.
Yeah.
And Ken, all these people who are fortunate enough to work with her. And I'm sure if Tharon was alive today, she'd probably give credit to Gene, Right. So I'm not saying it's something that she came up with. All I know is that in my life, that's the first time I saw it. And when I saw that show on Broadway, when it first came out, it changed my life, my whole lighting life, which is why Ken did what he did, which is why instead of taking Natasha's redesign, which I'm sure was brilliant, but like he said, she used movers, she used scrollers. He just went back to the original plot and the original focus charts and the original cues. And why it was so marvelous, because it's there. All using static fixtures.
Well, I think the problem with gobos is that we see them overused or poorly used. So it gets back to David saying, hey, put that leaf gobo on the giant wall upstage. So I think that's why directors are a little terrified of gobos, is people don't use them in a subtle way that Anne is talking about using them. And all of a sudden it turns into kind of a mess and you're not quite sure what you're looking at.
I totally agree.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And it's funny you mentioned Tharon's medallion. Total Bastard Products sent me a gobo medallion. It's Speedo on a fat guy, and I wear that around my neck all the time. I
want one. That should be our swag.
I was thinking about creating texture without gobos and ways that I do that in my own work, and I was thinking one of them is using the actual scenery, which is so great because it acts like a cucaloris. If you've done TV, that's a term that means gobo that's not in the light. Basically, it's like something the light is shooting through. Yep. So I use scenery like a cucaloris or a cookie sometimes. Yeah. So that's another great way to make texture without gobos. And, when a scenic designer gives you a gift like that, use it.
Steve has our last question of the day.
It's George in Mississippi, and he writes, can you suggest a couple of good books for my high school tech design class? Open source would be nice to help me save money, as I would have to buy these books for my class. Well, there's two. I would recommend Theater Backstage from A to Z by Lunsford and Bollinger, and they wrote a companion book, Theater Lighting from A to Z. So again, Lunsford and Bollinger, you can get these used for $5. And if I had a room full of 13 and 14-year-olds who've never been in the theater before, I think this would be a good way to start them off. You can also go to our webpage, and you can find these books listed on the resource page of our website.
There are a lot of books there. A lot of good books there.
53.
Wow.
Yeah, I was checking that out. We really have quite a nice little library selection, Steve. Thanks for doing all that.
We do have the Light Talk Presidential Library that is opening up in Sanford, Florida. We're at the end of the show. Well, that Hammond organ solo tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. Check out our website at lighttalk.org for future guests, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk fun.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast.
And just remember, if you choose to litigate us, our law firm of Fleck, Flock, Flair, and Glare, and their paralegal Snoot will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, San Clemente, Gainesville, and the Republic of Texas.
And tune in next week when we discuss, why bother with all these trade shows and conventions? Are we failing in the classroom? And lighting designers gone wild. I thought that was this episode.
All that and a new sponsor, Light Talk, broadcasting pretty questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye, everybody.